We have 3 different phases, okay? Phase 1 is the part where we identify our desired results, okay? And we can do this for our students. Those activities that you just created with the U.S. Marines, and you had an excellent example too, but I didn't get a chance for you to do it, but we'll do it later. But some of you have excellent examples where you contextualized in connected discourse level the grammatical feature that you're trying to focus on for that day. So this is what you could use. That connected level discourse, you can begin your class with that, okay? Backward design is a top-down approach, okay? Traditionally, with our course syllabus, we're used to doing something like I just taught you, a bottom-up approach, okay? And sometimes we waste our class time re-emphasizing the homework that the students did already, and we have them repeat and memorize. We don't need to do that. We can show them contextualized situations, the result of what we want them to learn before we actually pick it apart and go to specifics, okay? We also, in phase 2, need to determine acceptable evidence, okay? And then in phase 3, we have to plan our specific learning experiences and instruction in the classroom. Okay. So when we're talking about backward design, we need to first identify our results, okay? This is, again, a very top-down approach, and we need to focus on the end results that are desired. What do we want our learners to know at the end of what we're going to teach them, okay? And we need to keep in mind, a lot of people, when they think about backward design, they think about it as a daily concept. Like, what do I want my learners to learn today? But it's a lot more than that. Every time you make a lesson plan, you need to think about the overall program goals. Whether you're teaching the U.S. Marines, okay? That, or you're teaching, what level are you teaching?
I'm teaching adults Turkish.
Okay, so you're teaching adults Turkish in what kind of situation, what kind of environment?
Usually diplomats.
Okay, so they're diplomats. It's very different than the Marines. So you have to take your entire language program into consideration every day, okay? You can't just think about it on your course syllabus, okay? When you design your course syllabus, of course you're thinking about the overall language program goals, but you have to keep this in mind every time you make a lesson plan, okay? You also have to look at the stage of acquisition, okay? In a lot of the situations I've witnessed yesterday and today when we've been walking around, I've noticed a lot of you asking me questions about the individual learner differences in your classroom, okay? You are in situations where students are in the same classroom but do not always have the same stage of acquisition, okay? You're all the other guests. Yesterday, many of you said this to me. You said, well, I have, 6 intermediate learners and 5 that have never heard the language before, and they put them all in the same classroom with me, okay? So you have, that's very demanding. That's a very difficult job. But what you have to keep in mind is that stage of acquisition, that level of instruction, okay? If you have beginners and intermediates all in one classroom, when you're designing your lesson plans, you need to keep that in mind, okay? You need to simplify your input, modify it accordingly so that everybody understands what's going on in the classroom. Ideally, in an ideal world, we would have true beginners in one classroom, false beginners in this classroom, and then intermediates in this classroom, but that doesn't always happen in all of our language programs. You also have to think about the unit of study, okay? Give me an example in the language you teach of a unit of study.
It's all the grammar.
Okay, so all the grammar, she said. She said more like future tenses and sometimes past tenses. By the 4th week in your target language, you're teaching the past tense and almost the future tense as well. Do you see these two? She's teaching the future tense and the past tense all by the 4th week. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot. But you have to keep that in mind, that overall goal. You want them to talk about what they will do and what they did by that 4th week of class. Okay, that's very demanding. Very demanding. Okay, so these are the kind of things you need to think about with backward design. Okay, those overall goals. And you should think about that first okay? A lot of us look at our course syllabus and we say, oh, I need to teach subjunctive and noun clauses on Wednesday in class. How should I do that? And I start to create my lesson plan, right? How many of us do that? We look at our course syllabus. I mean, I still do it. I mean, I'm not supposed to, but it's just natural. It's a natural instinct to look at the course syllabus, see what we're doing on Wednesday, and focus on that, right? But in backward design, we need to take this top-down approach. We need to always consider the overall program goals, keep that in mind every day, the unit, and also the stage of acquisition, okay? We can also present to our students the results in class, okay? If I'm going to teach subjunctive and adverbial clauses or noun clauses, I can begin class by using subjunctive and adverbial clauses. Or let's say in Spanish, I'm going to talk about what I will do today. Hoy, pues, después de enseñar la clase, yo me voy a ir al supermercado. Voy con mis gemelos, mis niños, y nos vamos a comprar alguna fruta o algo así. Entonces, I can begin class speaking like that in unsimplified language, in language that is not modified, no? And it's contextualized using the target feature. Today, I'm going to do this, and I used it over and over and over again. Así se puede hablar, okay? You can use that in the class and demonstrate for your students this top-down approach. What you because they'll be like, what are you talking about, Professor Brewer? And you'll say, okay, yo apenas de decirte lo que vamos a enseñar hoy, lo que vamos a aprender hoy. So I just said, well, I just demonstrated to you exactly what we're going to do by the end of this class. And that is what backward design is all about, okay? You can begin providing comprehensible, meaning-bearing input that is contextualized for your students. I simplified it substantially for you, and then I directly told my students. I would tell them all of this in Spanish. I tell them, that is what you're going to do before you leave class today. You're going to be able to talk about that situation using those tenses before you leave class today. Okay? So you identify that desired outcome right away for the students. Okay? This is called backward design because most people don't think of doing it this way. We usually start out with little bits of language and move up to the desired outcome. But it's very fine to present the desired outcome first to the students. Okay. In phase 2, we need to determine acceptable evidence. Okay? Formally and informally assess the outcomes of the learner on a daily basis. I just demonstrated for you exactly what we should do when we're doing informal assessment. I gave you a handout with some questions, and these questions are actually a review of what we discussed yesterday. And I did this on purpose because I wanted to demonstrate what you should do in your language classroom. You can give them a handout of something you've already taught them, you've already discussed, and you can go around to each group and listen to them and ask them questions. And while you're doing this, you are providing a learning check. Reciprocal pronouns. How do you contextualize that and allow the students to attend to the language for meaning?
Be careful. There's a blast. Don't hurt yourself. Yeah.
Okay, and you could follow up with a scene saying that he hurt himself. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, what did you do to yourself? How did this happen? And do you see here how you are emphasizing the self concept of reciprocal pronouns? I was able to listen to each of your groups, and as I did, I was like, yeah, they got it. Okay, and I was listening to you talk, and yeah, they definitely understood what we discussed yesterday. They provided excellent examples, and you should do the same thing in your language class. Learning checks don't always have to be the big test at the end, okay? In fact, it can't just be that in languages. As you all know, if our students fall behind with 2 days of homework, their grade will seriously suffer, okay? The outcomes will be very negative. If they even miss 2 classes, they can be completely lost in our language classes because that's how fast we move. Okay, they have to do their homework every day. So daily learning checks are essential. And there are many different ways you can do that. You can do it with the way I just told you. Have some review questions on a handout, have your students get in groups, and you listen to each group and you can see if they all really understood, which is what I just did to you. You could also have little quizzes, little impromptu quizzes, which I do all the time. Technology is an excellent way to do daily learning checks. There are so many different technology-based programs that we can use that will individualize our instruction. Yesterday we talked about all the individual learner differences in our classroom. And we are supposed to teach language to all of these students in a collective fashion, yet account for their individual learner differences. The best way to do that is through technology, because you can attend to that student's errors. That student may not be using vocabulary correctly about what he did today so far. He might be talking about brushing his teeth, but he's not using the appropriate vocabulary. And you can treat that learner as an individual in 2 minutes. Respond with the appropriate vocabulary item, okay? One other way to informally assess students is through self-assessment, okay? Ask them to rate themselves, okay? It's very important that students are equipped with the skills to self-monitor their progress in language acquisition. It builds confidence for the learners. It's not a stressful test where they're going to get a grade. They are self-diagnosing their strengths and weaknesses in the different skills, okay? I'm going to give you an example of a very traditional self-assessment question. How well can you speak another language? This is the traditional way to self-assess. Not very well at all, okay, well, and very well. Okay, this is a very traditional way. I have done a series of experiments using this type of self-assessment that have shown students do not accurately self-assess themselves. Okay? However, when we use criterion reference self-assessment, where we situationalize the questions, they accurately assess their abilities. I can participate in everyday conversation in another language, though in some situations I am unable to produce particular words and phrases. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. In this situation, the students are putting themselves in the situation and they're assessing how they could do. This is so motivating for students, because if a student says strongly disagree, and they should be able to do that by now, it motivates them to work harder in the class. I strongly feel that self-assessment should be a big part of language programs, especially for phase 2 of backward design. In phase 3 of backward design, we have to plan the learning activities, okay? Plan the learning activities. Is our language methodology of our program ALM, CLT? Is it task-based, okay? We have to figure out, or we have to ask our program directors, or if we are the program director, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of methodology do I want our instructors to adhere to? What plan should we follow? How should we sequence the lesson? Do we start with explicit instruction? Hopefully not, okay? Hopefully you have the flexibility to do CLT where you don't have to start with explicit instruction and move to implicit. Is it learner-centered? Is it teacher-centered? Okay, you should ask these questions every day, okay, when you're designing your lesson plan. Also, what kind of resource materials am I going to use? Okay, yesterday, for example, I brought in that video clip from Friends. It was an excellent video clip that demonstrated how important it is to understand individual learner differences. Okay, Joey was very reluctant to produce the type of language that Phoebe wanted him to produce.
Je m'appelle. Pelle.
Great. Okay, faster. Je m'appelle.
Pelle.
Je m'appelle.
Mais poupou.
Okay, it's too hard. I can't teach you.
Also remember, the type of instruction Phoebe was using was isolated. It was decontextualized. So Joey was just like, blah, 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 you know, I mean, and he didn't even know what he was talking about, okay? That was an excellent example to show you how important it is to contextualize our activities on a daily basis. And we have to think of the visuals, the props, the technology resources. That video I showed you was an excellent resource to demonstrate what I was going to teach you. If you're teaching Don Quixote de la Mancha in Espanol, no? You can bring, there's a ton of YouTube excerpts that are 1 minute long that you can play in your classroom where native speakers are using the language in an authentic way for 1 minute, okay? And it just captures their attention, it motivates them. So you have to incorporate all of this in your daily lesson plan in your learning activities, okay? Now we have covered the 3 phases of a backward design for designing our lessons.